Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm watching World War I by Oversimplified. I think I know a decent amount about World War I. I'm not an expert, not close to it, but I do know some stuff. And this is oversimplified. So it's an oversimplified version of what went down during World War I and what caused it. I'm going to try to expand on some of the things he says because I'm sure he won't go into detail about a lot of the things he talks about here, considering how short the video is, and it's oversimplified. It's not meant to go into detail. It's just meant to get you interested in World War I and then do your own research on it. So let's check it out. Link to the original videos will of course be down in the description below.
The world of 1914, a time of modern technology, culture, and fashion. Truly the height of civilization. Let's have a war. Everyone knew a big war was coming. France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Germany wanted to take more of everyone's stuff, and they were building a big sexy navy that was making the British uncomfortable. These two empires thought they were really cool.
Germany
but
was
lots of
the
different people who lived there didn't
powerhouse
think
of
it was so
Europe
cool.
at this point in
And some of
time.
them had even been declaring independence with help from Russia. Everyone was talking about each other behind each other's backs, throwing the fact that military
Everyone hates
technology
each other,
had come
that's
a long
pretty
way
normal.
since the last major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up. In this area of Austria-Hungary lived some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria-Hungary. So the Austro-Hungarian Archduke
Austria-Hungary was kind of in the process of slowly falling apart during this time.
And that went just about as well as you'd expect. Some assassins were waiting for him along the way.
It was kind of
and
like a
threw bombs at
dying
his
empire
car,
already
but
at
they
this
missed
point.
and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happened. Except no.
The war would have still happened even if the Archduke was not assassinated. It was kind of what started the war, however, if it hadn't happened, there would have been some other reason why the war would have started. It was inevitable.
The Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital. The driver takes a
How
wrong
nice
turn
of him.
and by
However,
sheer
incredibly
coincidence
stupid.
gets stuck beside one of the failed assassins, who shoots him. Austria-Hungary is understandably pissed about all this.
What a
and they think
coincidence.
the Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, "Hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia," and Germany is all for that. So Austria-Hungary send a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war.
See, theoretically, this could have been it. Austria-Hungary goes to war with Serbia, that's it. No major war anywhere else. But alliances caused World War I here.
Austria-Hungary and Germany are friends, and Serbia is protected by Russia, who's friends with France, so they'll declare war on each other. Montenegro joins in too. France and Britain also have a kind of alliance, so when France says, "Hey Britain, you got my back?" Britain is like,
Maybe.
maybe?
Maybe.
And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan.
Ah, the Schleifenplan. I do believe this was about how Germany didn't want to fight on two fronts. So both the Russians and the French at the same time. They wanted to fight on one side, finish the enemy who's there, and then move on to the other side.
Plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war. So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all its troops into France at lightning speed while Russia's getting ready, defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, and then we all speak German and eat Pfefferpottast every day.
That's
Just
kind
one
of
problem.
a naive
France has
plan,
loads of forts and
because
defenses
you
along
can't
its German
guarantee
border,
that
and Germany
you'll
can't
just
waste any
defeat
time
France
fighting them.
lightning
So
quick.
Germany decides to go around them through Belgium.
which was a neutral country.
Belgium is neutral, but Germany wants to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defenses. They're hoping Belgium will just kind of sit down and shut up, but they don't. They fight back, and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're pretty pissed that Germany's invading neutral countries. So now Britain declares war on Germany. So Germany push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way. They also wear spikes and
War
sometimes
crimes,
skulls on the
typical.
uniform. So if you're trying to not
It's what
look like the
happens
bad
during
guys,
war.
good job. The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America. The US President Woodrow Wilson sees
There was a
himself as bit
lot
a
of
Jesus
Germans
figure
in America.
and spends most of the war trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United States, and when the war first
Now, I don't know much about this president, because I don't look much into American history, but if he's trying to get everyone to hug it out and being a Jesus figure, this is the oversimplified version, but this makes him sound like an absolute idiot. Because It makes him sound like he wants to use appeasement, which never works. Didn't work with Hitler, didn't work with Putin either.
First broke out, they were like, yay Germany. But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic. Let's play Spot the French Soldier. Did you see him? Easy, right? He's wearing a
Pretty
bright
easy
blue
to spot.
uniform with red trousers. And
Doesn't
you know who
blend
else
into
spotted
the
him easily
environment
too?
at all.
The Germans. So when the French were slowly marching in columns through the countryside, the Germans easily tore them to shreds with their giant guns. All the nations involved in this war went in with an old-school war mentality.
War is an adventure. Bayonet charges are cool. Cavalry is really effective. Dying for your country is awesome. Imagine having that type of mentality.
This war went in with an old-school war mentality. And all of them had to update.
I'd say dying for your country is an honorable way to go out, but I wouldn't say it's awesome.
Because this war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Russia's ready for war, and way earlier than expected. Hey,
They haven't even gotten to Belgium yet.
Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope.
And
So
they got
Germany
wrecked.
has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble. Austria-Hungary even gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all their invasion attempts at the start of the war. It's better news for
Wow.
Germany in the north, though, where they almost completely wipe out the Russian Second Army. Back on the Western Front, the Germans continue advancing and are in sight of Paris. At this point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But then things start to go wrong. The French commander
I mean, just taking Paris itself, yes, it's a huge victory for the Germans, but it doesn't completely knock France out of the war. It shouldn't. Just because you take the capital city of a country doesn't mean that country has lost. It's a pretty big blow to morale, and it just makes you look really bad, but it doesn't mean you lost.
Commander-in-Chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German lines. If a gap opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack,
And this is where they started digging trenches.
The Allies do the same.
This
Then
is where
both
the
sides
real
move
horrors
north,
of the war
trying to outflank
started.
each other along the way. When they reach the sea, they're in a stalemate with trench systems running
Pretty
the
much
whole way
all of
from the
Belgium
coast to
was just
Switzerland,
under German
the beginning
occupation.
of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. Two opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between. One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time. This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many shell-shocked. Then, the attacking troops would leave their trenches and
Trench
rush across
warfare
no
from
man's
World War
land.
I really reminds
A
me of
muddy
what's
white map of
happening
shell craters
in
and
Ukraine
barbed
right
wire.
now.
The defending
It's obviously
trench would
not the
unleash
exact
machine gun fire on the
same,
attackers,
but it's
inflicting
kind
thousands
of
casualties.
similar. It's just
The
a war
attackers
of
would send
attrition.
wave after wave until either they
At
gave
this
up
point
or the
in
opposing
time.
trench was finally overrun. There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of
Thousands.
land.
Tens of thousands, you mean?
Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses, mud that could swallow you whole, pools of
Disease.
poisonous water, rats, disease, the smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions, and commanders ordered them to do so for years.
And that is the end of part 1. Time for part 2.
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down.
Yep, war of
The Allies
attrition.
had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominions, and the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really wanted a long, grueling war though, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number 1, new frontiers.
New frontiers.
When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea. The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa, and particularly in German East Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans. Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Some new
I always liked this part of Germany because it just looks like a thumbs up.
combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy
And
actually
then
had an
20
alliance
years
with
later they
Germany
were
and
destroyed by
Austria-Hungary
the
before war.
Americans.
But after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck
they
in
also got
stalemate for
stuck.
most of the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East. The Ottomans The Ottoman were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia, and then came back and said, "Whoops, looks like we're at war now." The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the Ottomans tried to attack Russia.
Well, at least we know where the Americans got it from. The Americans got their love for oil from the British.
In the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold and many of them froze to death. Then they crossed miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed. The Ottomans blamed their initial losses on the ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people. Then the Germans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack
This
India.
I didn't know.
That plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan.
Yeah, you can't do that.
All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks. The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started...
Yeah, when it comes to war, usually rules are broken because it's war. War is a terrible thing. Who cares about rules in war? You know what I'm saying?
Started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas, and they used submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania, which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying US opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans,
the Allies also
engaged in chemical warfare soon after,
weapons.
And they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's...
So like every country, they just wanted more war.
So they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia.
Land.
The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea.
A friendly invasion.
It's 1916, and a lot is happening. As if they didn't have enough enemies already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around the same time, the only
that was
sea battle
pointless,
of the war
to be
happened.
honest,
Both
declaring
sides had
war
a new
on them.
powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that
they
neither
used
side
these things
wanted to
like
risk losing them in a battle,
once?
so they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again. The UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties
60,000 in one day.
It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology.
What was that one called? The Mark 1?
The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war.
They are literally surrounded on every side.
The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north. The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia to protect Persia's oil fields.
I wonder if you'll mention
a small army up the Tigris River to try to take
what was
Baghdad.
it called? Lawrence?
The army got sieged in the
Lawrence of Arabia, I think?
And eventually surrendered.
Was that World War II?
A new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone was exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving,
the
war had drained all of Russia's supplies.
There
was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first?
Russia.
And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots,
Oh
there
yeah,
was an uprising in
Rasputin.
Petrograd.
Maybe I should make a video
complete with
reacting to
riots and
him.
strikes.
I've
The
heard
riots
he's
turned
crazy.
into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the
They got
Bolsheviks
overthrown as
overthrew
well.
the new government, and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany, who now only had to focus on the Western Front. But there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war and was getting super rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans. So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, wouldn't it be crazy cool?
Oh
if you
yeah,
guys
they did
attacked
that, didn't
America?"
they? They
But
tried
the
to
British
convince
intercepted
Mexico
the message, showed it to the Americans, and that
to
was the
attack the
final
United
straw.
States.
American troops began shipping out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew their only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one
At this
final
point it was
attack.
already over.
They
There was
converged
no
their
reason
troops
for them,
and
for the
hit hard
Germans
at
to
the
even
Somme and
try
pushed
at
the
this
Allies
point.
back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With
Each
each
time
hit,
they're just
the
gonna get
Germans were
weaker
spending
and
more
weaker.
more resources, while the Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the fifth punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. After indescribable suffering and millions dead, the world learnt its lesson and never had such an awful war again.
For 20 years.
For about 20 years.
The time between World War I and World War II was kind of like a pause in the fighting. Germany was also blamed heavily for everything, and the amount of blame the Germans received is what helped Hitler to take control as easily as he did, because the Germans truly were oppressed by the Allies, no, mainly the French, also the Americans though, because the Americans also screwed them over. But yeah, Germany being blamed makes sense, because without their support, Austria-Hungary probably wouldn't have actually gone to war with Serbia, because it was kind of a dying empire at the time, while Germany was the powerhouse of Europe. Germany also invaded a neutral country, Belgium, so that definitely didn't do them any favors. They did sink civilian ships, and yes, the Allies were hiding equipment on those ships, but still, sinking civilian ships, not good. They lost the war, so that's also a reason why they were punished so heavily. They were really strong before the war, so the Allies didn't want that to happen again. They didn't want to let the Germans regain their strength to go for round two, which obviously didn't work out because that's exactly what the Germans did. The Germans were blamed heavily, too heavily, because it just festered resentment from the Germans, which had really terrible consequences later on, 20 years later, in World War II. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you're interested, why not watch this video right here? And with that, I hope I'll see you in the next video.